This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on political developments in Nepal. The participants are Atul Aneja, International Affairs expert, and Manas Pratim Bhuyan, journalist.
Mr. Aneja, how do you see the political developments in Nepal? This is quite significant, actually, in fact, that Prime Minister Oli has lost trust vote in the Nepalese parliament, bringing fresh instability and political chaos in Kathmandu at a time when the country is facing increasing cases of coronavirus. How do you see the overall development in Nepal?
I think it's extremely unfortunate that at a time of a medical crisis of the dimensions of COVID-19, that you have political instability entering Nepal, where, as you can see, that the Oli government does not command a majority in the House. Therefore, this is a time when there is a new government has to be formed in Nepal. And I don't see, looking at the numbers and the political equations inside Nepal, the political divisions both within the communists and the Nepali Congress, which is a rival party, also not being able to muster enough numbers. So I don't see how we can have this instability come to an end anytime soon. Because as I see it, now there are going to be two things which are going to happen. That the president is likely to invoke Article 76(2) and ask the leader of the other main political party, which I think will be Nepali Congress, to try and form a government. But I don't see the numbers adding up enough for a new government under a new prime minister coming up. The ball will again go back to Oli's court under Article 76(3), and there will be another month, I suppose, where he will be then told to try and form another government. And if that fails, then the country goes for a general election. So frankly, I see Nepal heading in that direction for the next few months. So that is going to have implications that we are going to have a phase of prolonged transition right now in Nepal. And there are pressing concerns both domestically towards India as well as towards China. So this is a phase where also many geopolitical equations will come into the picture.
You've definitely mentioned China's efforts to expand its influence in Nepal. In the last 6 months, we have seen, in fact, China's direct involvement in Nepal's internal politics. China tried to just patch up between the two factions in Nepalese Communist Party, one led by Mr. Oli and other led by Mr. Prachanda. So how do you see China's renewed interest in Nepal and its effort to expand its influence over Kathmandu at a time when India's relations with Nepal was going really strong? Mr. Oli has always been perceived to be someone who is close to Beijing. So how do you see the overall developments in Nepal impacting India's strategic interest in overall development of Nepal? Please elaborate what kind of role China is playing in destabilizing Nepal and the implications for India.
My own view of Prime Minister Oli is not that he is, or the communists themselves are necessarily pro-China. I think they are pro-Nepal, and there is a strong sense of Nepali nationalism which we in India should not undermine. Coming to China's outlook and its moves inside Nepal, obviously there are deep geopolitical interests of the Chinese. And you can see that the Chinese want to structurally link Nepal with Tibet and thereafter with the Chinese main. I'll just elaborate this point a little. There's a Chinese railway which goes to Tibet and comes to a place called Shigatse, which is close to the border with Nepal. Now the Chinese want to extend that railway from Shigatse to Kathmandu. And this is the dream project right from Maoist times. And if that happens, then actually your Kathmandu gets interlinked with the Chinese transportation system and in a way becomes part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. So this is one move which the Chinese are doing of structurally linking. There are certain ports in China which have been designated for use by Nepal. So the idea of the Chinese is very clear. A, to structurally integrate Nepal, and B, to undermine India's influence in Nepal. There's a very clear-cut goals which the Chinese are doing. Third thing which strikes me is the diplomatic role being played. I would say quote-unquote diplomatic. The role being played by their ambassador, Ms. Ho Yanchi. And she has been going far beyond a diplomatic brief, but openly trying to meddle in Nepal's internal politics. So it's been quite shocking to see diplomat playing that kind of a role. But that also shows the desperation of the Chinese to draw Nepal into their orbit of influence. So I think there's another element which comes to the picture. One is that if you see the tensions between India and China in Ladakh, I think the Chinese are also looking at one more theater, which is the tri-junction between India, Nepal, and China, specifically around the Lipu Lake Pass. So there's a security dimension also which comes in from the Chinese side. So I think a nationalist in Nepal and we in India have to be very careful about the Chinese moves. Now we have the political crisis coming up. So what happens, the outcome of this crisis is, I think, going to have a lot of implications, not just domestically for the Nepalese, but for the region, and especially will have a major impact on how Nepal equates with China and India.
How do you see the role being played by Mr. Prachanda, Pushpakumar Dahal? So his friction with Mr. Oli has led to this crisis. And Prachanda is known to be a very influential leader actually, and he had led that armed movement in Nepal. So what kind of role you see for Prachanda in Nepal's political landscape? And what is his influence and what kind of role that he is expected to play in the next few months?
I think Prachanda is definitely a very influential leader and has been traditionally been so. He was Oli's partner in the Nepal Communist Party, the new party which was formed, united two separate factions of the Communist Party. But I do see that his influence may have been exaggerated because despite he being a heavyweight, he doesn't have enough clout, and that's been shown over the last few months, to carry enough members of parliament or within the Communist Party with him. You also have players like Madhav Nepal, who are major players, have in the last, this vote of no confidence which we had, have abstained. So then definitely hedging their bets as well. So it's not clear whether Prachanda is going to have influence over these heavyweights as well. So I think his limitations of influence have been exposed, and that's one of the reasons why there is this instability which has come into Nepal. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. As I said, we are probably in the end will be heading towards elections because as of now, none of these heavyweights like Prachanda or Oli or Madhav Nepal or the Nepali Congress has sufficient numbers behind them to emerge as a leader.
So in fact, earlier this year we have seen this diplomatic row between India and Nepal over the new map that Nepal had unveiled after India inaugurated a very key border road in Uttarakhand. So how do you see this development? In fact, did the incident significantly damage our ties, or has it been repaired after high-level visits both from India to Kathmandu and Kathmandu to India in the last few months? So do you see China gaining ground in Kathmandu because of this lingering dispute between India and Nepal over certain areas in Uttarakhand? So do you see any kind of significant damage that the incident may have resulted in our ties?
Initially, we thought that India has lost, but I think what is very important is that you have to look at the internal dynamics of Nepal. And Oli at that point in time had played his nationalist card. And in order to do that, this whole thing about cartographic, quote-unquote, adjustments, in the sense of including territories which are clearly with India as shown on the new map of Nepal. As I see it, I think in India we saw it as an attempt to raise a nationalist bogey for political goals rather than necessarily anti-India move in the long run. And as you said, I think there's been a lot of damage control. In fact, I think we've arrested the damage with a string of visits which started from last October, which also led to the visit of the army chief. The military to military track remained very strong. And then we had the Nepal foreign minister coming to India, Pradeep Gyawali. And I think there was a good understanding finally between India and Nepal on this issue. But of course, it is an issue which still has to be resolved. And I think we will revisit that. We've had the meetings between India and Nepalese on this particular subject and the new cartographic alignments which Nepal has tried. I think right now India is interested more in the bigger picture of having a stable and a pro-India or at least a neutral government in Nepal. And once that is established, then we revisit this issue, which right now is on the back burner, but will come up at some point in time after there is greater political stability in Nepal.
And how do you see the role of the Madhesi parties, in fact, which were traditionally very, very pro-India? They were originally from India. So how do you see their role in the current political matrix?
I think they'll play a significant role, there is no doubt. But I think this is a bit of a misnomer that, they are the pro-India, they are the loyalist Indians, and others are not. I think it's time we realize that the Nepalese And all Nepalese have benefited from a fantastic relationship between India and Nepal. I mean, look at the Gorkha troops in the Indian military. And that is people who are not Madhesis, who are central to India's national security. So I think India's relationship goes beyond just the people in the Terai area, though they are closer to the state of Bihar, etc. So you do have a cross-border connection which is strong. But I think that particular situation has been overcome long ago. That India has a special relationship with all the ethnic communities inside Nepal because of the kind of special relationship we have had with Nepal in terms of open borders, Nepalese coming and working in India, intercultural ties. So there are many, many more factors than territorial proximity which bind India and Nepal. I was in China for 5 years as a correspondent earlier, and I could see what the Chinese were most miffed about was a special cultural relationship between India and Nepal, which is centuries old. And that is something which cannot be replicated on the altar of expediency of geopolitics. And the Chinese know that. So there is a very, very strong cultural connect between India and Nepal. And I think that goes across ethnic lines in Nepal.
So definitely, in fact, you spoke about this very, very decades-old relationship between India and Nepal, and which was reflected in the 1950 India-Nepal Treaty of Peace and Friendship. And we share nearly 1900 kilometers long border, which is mostly open border. But still, in fact, Nepalese political parties have been seeking a review of the India-Nepal Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1950. So how do you see it in the context of fast-changing political developments in Nepal?
I think this is a great point because you see, what India has to adapt really is to understand that Nepal of today is in a globalized world, is a far different Nepal than what it was in the 50s or when the treaty was signed. So I think we got to understand that a new generation of Nepalese has come in, and they are the ones who are exposed to the rest of the world. Their elite is changing its character. Many have studied in universities abroad. So, their level of awareness of events in and out of the region is substantial and has changed completely. So I think we need to strike a new generational bond with the Nepalese. And I think even when it comes to Nepalese benefiting from India, they would be wanting to get into MBAs and getting into a private sector rather than the traditional occupations of military and otherwise. So I think both sides have to readjust to each other. I should make this point that from an Indian perspective, I think it's very important that we do not give them a feeling of a big brother. I think it's very important that we speak to the Nepalese in a language which is equal and which is respectful. I think that will go a long way in winning hearts and minds in Nepal.
How do you see Nepal in the next few months? In fact, are you going to see a stable Nepal or political uncertainty will continue? As a close Nepal watcher, how do you see Nepal in the next few months and years in its political journey?
Yeah, I think the next few months it's going to be unstable. There's no question about it. As I said, we'll probably be heading in the next 3 months or so for a general election. And after that, I don't see any reason necessarily that's going to be unstable. I think finally the people of Nepal will have to make up their mind whether they want to continue with the voting pattern they've been pursuing right now or go for a radical change. I think that's the real clincher would come internally in Nepal. And I see no reasons why we will have this instability ended after we have the next general elections. People like Oli and all are very seasoned politicians. They are also watching what changes are required. Frankly, I'm cautiously optimistic about Nepal's future and the relationship of Nepal and India.
Thank you, Mr. Aneja, for your detailed overview and your perspective about the latest political developments in Nepal. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on political developments in Nepal. The participants were Atul Aneja, International Affairs Expert, and Manas Pratim Bhuyan, Journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.